Hey everyone, and welcome back to the newest episode of the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Staub, and on today's episode, we have a returning guest, only because he's my good friend, and we work together quite a bit. It only makes the most sense for me to talk to him about retro gaming all of the time. The museum coordinator and an all-around great guy, Mr. Brendan Bailey, is back to talk about modern retro. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm doing all right. I'm excited to have you back. Thank you for coming back on such short notice. You were only on a few episodes ago, but it's good to have you back and talking about a lot of things. For those of you who don't know, Brendan and I, in conjunction with working in the museum section of the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, we also have our own set of videos on the Long Island Retro Gaming YouTube. So be sure to check out Everdives, which is a very fun experience for Brendan and I. Brendan, how do you feel about the whole Everdives thing?
I think it's great. Like when you watch somebody on YouTube and they have like a formula or some sort of gag that they've used to like make a format for themselves. I feel like we have it. I just feel like it's easy. It's easy content. It's kind of content that I would watch as like somebody that watches videos on YouTube about games. It's like, let me just watch some guys play random games. Like I'm not interested in watching somebody play a game on Twitch. But if you said like, hey, someone's going to just randomly play some retro games, like I would watch that.
And that's exactly what the show is. So Everdives, for those of you who are not acquainted with, be sure to check it out on the Long Island Retro Gaming YouTube channel, which you should be following and subscribe to already, because there's so much great content up there. But Everdives, Brendan and I, we have a Sega Genesis Everdrive. And what we do is we hit one of the functions of the Sega Genesis Everdrive is select random game. And the list of games that we have on the Everdrive is actually pretty robust. It includes Master System games. It includes ROM hacks and
beta versions of
games.
Versions,
yeah.
All sorts of weird stuff, homebrew games, whatever
could fit on there.
Whatever's on there, whatever was available, like in those giant like ROM archives, is on there.
Yeah, and it's often disastrous, but it's a lot of fun. So be sure to check that out. And I guess that's part of like what we're talking about today. When I talked to Joel last month about retro gaming and stuff in general, we came to this conclusion that it was like, retro gaming is kind of like, I understand that it's like not at its peak in terms of like these games are no longer like coming out currently, right? But I feel like retro gaming is like the most popular it's been, like ever. Like right now, I think it's like now might be the best time to be into this stuff. I think guys like you and I, Brendan, who kind of skirt the line between playing modern stuff and retro stuff, I feel like it's a good time to be a gamer.
I feel like I agree with you, but also I feel like if you rewound 5 years ago, I feel like you could say the exact same thing and also not be wrong. Like we've been in this. I feel like we've been in this phase of just retro gaming popularity, both with like modern indie games that have been coming out and also just resurgence of interest in, the original retro games in the form of, Everdrives and also modern retro consoles, like all the new HD retro consoles that have come out that can play the old cartridges, but on modern televisions and that kind of thing. So like, and that's been going on for a while now. So like, I guess what I would say is that it's been like this way. It's been this way for a couple of years, but like it hasn't died off.
Yeah. It's like, it's not slowing down, and it seems like there's more and more stuff, whether you're talking about, the Mister, or you're talking about, like you said, Everdrives, or you're talking about like the analog machines, which I've been obsessed with my Analog Pocket. I've been playing it nonstop and going back and revisiting old games that I either didn't spend enough time with or never really got a chance to play, and realize that those handheld libraries from, in general, like across the board, are so robust when you think about it. I didn't always think about it. I wasn't always a handheld gamer, but during the pandemic, I got really into DS and 3DS games. and never really spent too much time with the GBA. Like I played a couple Metroid games, I played a couple of Castlevania games, and a Final Fantasy here or there, but I didn't sit and play them. I was actually more excited to put them in the Game Boy Player and play those games kind of like on the big screen. But with stuff like the Analog Pocket, I love it, and everyone I show it to is like floored. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe the screen on this thing looks so good. It looks better than like whatever they have going on the Switch library right now." But that's kind of it, man. It's kind of like this tidal wave of indie stuff, and the big publishers are getting behind it too. You've got these retro inspired sequels and remakes of games. We've seen a remake of Link's Awakening in the last few years. We had Metroid Dread, which was, a modern 2D Metroidvania. We have the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters finally getting released on console this year. So I feel like you said, you'd brought up indie games and you'd brought up old consoles, I guess is the best way to put it. But I also feel like the big guys are into this as well. I've been playing a little bit of Octopath Traveler 2, and that game is clearly inspired and influenced by SNES and PlayStation 1 role playing games. But I think the big one here is, it's first of all, okay, can we talk about Metroid for a second?
We can talk about Metroid. I've played some Metroid games.
I've actually witnessed you play Super Metroid on a 100% run in under 3 hours, while I sat next to you playing Mega Man X at MagFest a handful of years ago. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a good time. I don't know if you know this, but the main character in Metroid is actually a woman.
What?
Yeah, I know. Big reveal.
But can Metroid crawl?
I didn't realize that until till the end of the Metroid games. Big shocker. And her name's not Metroid.
Really?
Yeah, it's Samus.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, Metroid is actually the little parasite, little ball parasites that you got to kill.
Yeah. You murdered them. It's a game about murdering all the Metroids.
Nintendo really kind of screwed up the narrative of Metroid by having all the Metroids get killed in the second game.
But not all of them.
Yeah, just that one that dies in the next game. I don't really know how they resurrected it from there, to be honest. I feel like all the storylines after that have been cop-outs.
Yeah.
The Metroids died, guys. You blew it. Like, it's over. You could have Samus be the main character, but they got to do something else. She's got to do something else.
I feel like, and this is spoilers for Metroid Dread, so for any of you who hadn't played Metroid Dread yet, just go ahead and skip ahead like a minute or two, or maybe 30. I don't know how long we're going to stay on this. But at the end of Metroid Dread, Samus essentially becomes a Metroid, right? Because like in Fusion, her DNA is fused with the Metroid DNA, so she gets like these special Metroid things. They make like this. She had a parasite attack her, and to fight the parasite, they gave her Metroid DNA from some solution they made, some cure, and then after that, by the end of Metroid Dread, she's just essentially like a Metroid, which is ridiculous. But I love every second of it. So I feel like now I don't know.
So this might be how they fix the whole thing. So full disclosure, I'm not a first person shooter guy, so I never played the Metroid Prime games. I know they're amazing. Everybody tells me how amazing they are, and I'm sure they're great. And I'm sure if I were to play a first person shooter, that would be a good one for me to play because I like Metroid a lot. So I didn't play any of those games. So I really don't know the story of those games. I didn't play Metroid Other M because I heard it was terrible. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I did play Metroid Fusion. That game's awesome. And I played Dread, which I thought was fantastic. But so here's maybe how they fix it, and not to get too in the weeds with.
Let's get in the weeds. Let's go.
Human and Metroid reproduction, but it's like there would be an interesting parallel between the Metroid hatching in Metroid 2 and thinking that Samus is its mother, to now the fact that Samus is kind of a Metroid if she were to give birth to a Metroid and actually be a Metroid's mother.
That's bizarre.
That might be a little too much for Nintendo to do. I don't think they would go into crossbreeding humans with monsters. I just don't think Nintendo would do that. But if you think about it narratively, that would actually be like kind of a slam dunk.
I think it would be terrific. I think we call the next game Kid Metroid. and you play
You
as
play as
a
the baby
as a baby human Metroid combo.
humanoid Metroid. Yeah.
I think this is perfect. Let's do this. Let's write this game, Brendan. I think this is a good pitch. But I think my point here is that, anyway, we went off into the weeds for a second. I need to bring us back. So you bring up Metroid Prime, right? Um, Metroid Prime is an excellent game. It's I understand the idea of like what is retro versus what isn't retro is very up for debate a lot of the time, because it's like, you have some people are like, anything older than 10 years. You have some people who are like, it cuts off at the PS2. I don't really
I
know.
think we just need like a new category, right? We just need like this middle category where like the graphics were pretty good. They were clearly way better than pixel art, but they weren't as primitive as PS1 and
Yeah.
N64. We need
Yeah.
like a bridge category for like the PS2, basically
Yeah.
the PS2 era.
Yeah. Just the
that, that,
PS2
that,
guys.
that one generation needs its own category to be like,
Yeah.
it's not retro, but it's not modern either. It's not a,
It's, well,
that,
I like the term that gets thrown around that's called classic gaming. I think that actually kind of works. I think that works too. I use that as much as I possibly can. But anyway, Metroid Prime is 21 years old. It's a 21-year-old game, and it's fantastic. So, Brendan, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Metroid Prime games, from my understanding, all three of them actually take place between the events of Metroid and Metroid 2.
interesting.
So, yeah, so that's where
back when the Metroids existed.
back when they were still around and the space pirates were trying to, use them as biological weapons or whatever. So, in Metroid Prime, you kind of go through like there's three games that just happen while you're just trying to deal with the Metroids all over the place before you go to their home planet. Now, Metroid Prime most recently, and it's been a really like hot button issue. Like Nintendo's such a weird company because like they'll do these things and they'll build up Tears of the Kingdom for like 5 years or 4 years or 3 years when they started showing a new Zelda. And then people for years have been asking for Metroid Prime to get some sort of remaster or some sort of remake or some sort of just a port to the Switch. And in the middle of their Nintendo Direct, they were just like, "Oh yeah, Metroid Prime's available like in an hour on Nintendo Switch." Like you could just buy it. You could buy it was $40. You could buy the digital version for $40, and then like, and if you really want, you physical maniacs who have to own everything on a physical hard copy version, that's going to be available too, which has been crazy because it's been so hard for people to get their hands on Metroid Prime's physical copy because it just sold so quickly and so well that Nintendo was quote unquote surprised at the high demand and for this game that they've actually gone and like printed more copies for people to buy. This is really weird for a 20-year-old game. Now the remaster of Metroid Prime is really good. It's really nice. They updated all the graphics. It looks incredible. Like it's among some of the best looking games that are coming out right now. The new control schemes work really, really well. Like it actually plays a little bit more like a first person shooter where you have like the twin sticks and you can shoot with your trigger buttons in the back. So it's really cool. But I'm just amazed because for years, and Brendan, you're a Metroid fan like I am. For years, we've just heard that like no one really cares about this series. It'll sell maybe 1 million copies, maybe a little bit more, and it just won't do super well. So Nintendo won't make them that frequently. But it seems like over the past few years and over the past month or so, the Metroid like appreciation over at Nintendo has been massive, and I don't know why. I'm kind of puzzled as to why out of nowhere it seems like Metroid demand is through the roof.
I mean, I have some theories, but I don't necessarily know for
Yeah,
sure. But
let's theorize.
I think Metroid is possibly Nintendo's only property that isn't like, I don't want to say like kiddish or like
Yeah, I get it.
bright and colorful and super family friendly. Like it's kind of dark, you know. It's really
Yeah,
the only one
yeah.
that is still dark. And like there were some other franchises that I thought were not necessarily rough around the edges, but like got more colorful as time went around. I mean, I would even go as far as to say it's like, Mario Kart on N64 is kind of like an aggressive racing game. It's a little goofy, but it got sillier as time went on, like Double
Yeah,
Dash and all this. Like it just the silliness factor just got cranked up. It was less aggressive overall, in my opinion. But like
yeah,
Metroid is one of those franchises that like I mean, Metroid Dread is a pretty dark game for like a Nintendo first party game, and
yeah.
it's one of the only Nintendo properties that's really like that. So I think that has a lot of appeal because I think people know that Nintendo makes great games, and if you want something that's a little darker, Metroid's really your only option when it comes to first party Nintendo games.
Yeah, it really is. And, it kind of created a genre, right? It kind of created a genre of video games. I know we like to call them quote unquote Metroidvanias, and people on the internet either love that term or hate it because that's the way the internet works.
Yeah,
But I always find it pretty amusing that, like, other games in the genre that have come out way later will sell like so many more copies than like the progenitor or the kind of the game that kind of started it all, and that's obviously Super Metroid. But yeah, no, I agree. I think you're right. I think for a Nintendo fan base that might be getting a little older, especially if you just started with, let's say, you started with the GameCube or you started with the Wii, right, or even the Wii U and or the 3DS or whatever, and you're making your way, into what Nintendo's got. If you need something that's, a little bit darker, a little bit scarier, I think Metroid actually, I think that Metroid kind of borders on the on being a horror series. It's very close to being a horror series for a especially for a first party Nintendo game, and it's not like the goofy Disney style spooky scary horror game that you would get out of like Luigi's Mansion, which is a series I love. But yeah, Metroid is it's got something else. There's a hardcoreness to it that you don't necessarily see elsewhere. I think that might be also why the fan base is a little smaller than some other franchises that Nintendo has. But I think people like hard games now. I feel like they're looking for tough games. We're seeing Elden Ring. Maybe that's part of the Elden Ring or any of the Soulsborne style games. So maybe that's why too why Metroid maybe is getting a bump right now, because the games tend to be difficult. They're not always the easiest. Now, you can master them, right? But I always feel like they're not super easy, and I think that might be appealing to a lot of people now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because there's a lot of things going on in games in terms of difficulty. I mean, one of the big things I've seen, especially in indie games, is like the accessibility menu,
Yeah.
which you can opt to make the game easier if you want. And then there's other gamers that are like, no, you have to just beat. There's only one setting. Like you have to beat the game this way. Like there's no easy mode. There's no accessibility menu. Um, and so I am curious, how popular difficult games are versus easy games, or if the prevailing thing is to give people the option of how difficult a game is. Me personally, I get more satisfaction. Like one of the most satisfying games for me was Hollow Knight because it
Yeah.
really was difficult, and like the boss battles really became kind of like epic trials of learning and patience, and even though they were really hard, beating some of those bosses left me with like a deep sense of satisfaction when I finally did it. And so for me personally, I kind of lean towards stuff that is, it seems difficult at first, and then you realize that it's actually very fair. It's not difficult because it's broken, or or there's like a crazy difficulty spike or anything like that. It's just you need to put in the time to like master something, master a
Yeah.
sequence and learn a boss.
Yeah.
And I
I,
much prefer that to any sort of level up system, or just, hey, if you keep grinding, eventually the boss will get super easy. This is a major problem I have with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, is that game, it's a wonderful game, but you hit certain boss battles. I mean, by the time I got to Dracula, I beat him on the first try. I mean, it wasn't even a fight. I was so leveled up. I just kind of walked in and destroyed him. And I was like, that was the final boss. Like, I'm sure at some level that would have been a challenging boss fight, but like, it's just not, because haphazardly leveled up way beyond what I needed to.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you got a point there. I think a lot of times with RPGs in general, they become less about how difficult something is and more about how much time you're willing to invest to progress your characters to a point where everything is just easy. I think with stuff like accessibility options and making games easier, like I don't mind. Like that doesn't bother me at all. And even Metroid Dread had added, an easier mode for people who are having a hard time getting through it. And that's fine. I think that's great. I think whatever you get out of gaming is what you get out of gaming, right? If it's your half hour per day that you relax with at the end of the day, I think in playing a really, really difficult game might throw that off. I totally get why you might want to just experience the story and turn down the difficulty a little bit. But I agree with you too, Brendan. The difficulty I like is difficulty where it feels like the next time I fight this boss, the next time I do this section is going to be the time that I clear it, where I gotten better every single step of the way. And I feel that a lot with Metroid style games. I think Metroid Dread was a really good example. Some really great boss fights in that game that obviously retro inspired with the patterns and the cycles and how the bosses work. And the art of the boss fight is kind of something that has kind of gone away a little bit. You do have games like Souls games that are pretty much all about the complexity of like a really good boss fight, and games like Bayonetta where you have like really great boss fights. But I feel like for a while we were losing out on those to make games seem more quote unquote cinematic, realistic, or whatnot. But the Metroid games always do a really good job of that, and I think off the heels of Dread being a pretty big success for the series, I think it's the best selling Metroid game ever. It might have just uh, went past Metroid Prime. I think they're both about 3 million. I think this remaster might actually push Metroid Prime a little further ahead in terms of sales figures. But at the same time, Nintendo also announced that they're going to put Metroid Fusion on the Nintendo Switch Online, which I think is great, and I think that's another excellent game in that vein. That's just so good for fans to be able to play it on their Switch. Now, you said you played Fusion, right? You liked Fusion?
yeah, yeah, Fusion was cool. I mean, that was really for a while there. That was really the only game you could play after Super Metroid came out. That
Yeah,
the only 2D Metroid game that was really available.
yeah,
Um, and so it was kind of like and to be honest, I wasn't really a big fan. I wasn't a big fan of Game Boy in general. Like
yeah.
when I played Game Boy games as a kid, whether it was Pokemon or Metroid 2, I always played them on my Super Game Boy. I liked playing them on the big screen, and I did not have the attachment to do that with my GameCube, so I was sort of forced to play the Game Boy Advance in handheld mode.
Which
Handheld mode, which is a term I use for the Switch now. And but so I didn't really like playing it on that, but like I was kind of forced to, and it was still a great game. Recognized that it was a great game and kind of exactly what I had been wanting to play ever since I fell in love with Super Metroid. And there were no Metroid games on the N64, and the GameCube Metroid games were not 2D. So
Yep.
right there, it was like, well, guess I got to play a Game Boy Advance game.
Oh, look at
The,
me! This thing,
that
this
poor,
thing's
This was during a time in my life where I was very kind of down in the dumps about video games. I guess I was still so attached to like '90s games, and like as
yeah.
things started changing, I it kind of originally rejected everything. Like I was not a fan of the GameCube. I didn't have a PS2 for a while. I just sort of missed that whole generation. And again, I kind of went back and have really enjoyed a lot of games on those systems. But um, yeah, that was sort of where I was at. Game Boy Advance is probably one of the few systems I really played in that generation, as well as the Dreamcast. I was like big
Oh
on the
yeah.
Dreamcast for some reason.
Dreamcast is well. I think the thing with the Dreamcast is that the Dreamcast is kind of like an arcade machine, right? It's kind of the
Yeah,
closest thing to like the Dreamcast, in my opinion, was like the fruition of like all of Sega's efforts from the 80s and 90s. Like all Sega really ever wanted to do was bring the arcade home. And with the Dreamcast, they were really able to do that. And on launch day, when you launch with giant arcade hits like Crazy Taxi, Soul Calibur, and Marvel vs. Capcom, I think you really just kind of bring it home that it's like an arcade system. Like this is the arcade in your house. It was the closest the games on the console I think ever looked at that time to their
Yeah,
arcade counterparts.
they finally did it.
They finally did it, and then they went under. And
Yeah.
the Dreamcast was kind of their swan song. But we spent a lot of time, obviously, on the Genesis, and with Ever Drives and with the EverDrive show, working with the Genesis and the Analog Mega SG. I feel like these new retro consoles are really special. I feel like they've done a lot for people who are looking to have as close to an original hardware experience as you possibly can. I mean, the things these things do are pretty incredible. I don't think everyone always realizes that if you hook up your Genesis to an HD TV with like a regular hookup, it's really not going to be a good time. So it's pretty cool that Analog would do this. And I've been playing Metroid Fusion actually on my Analog Pocket because I like it so much. I'm happy to see this stuff come back. I'm happy to see a lot of this modern retro thing kind of doing really, really well. And I think the pixel graphics. I mean, you're an artist. You're developing your own game. Is there like there's got to be some sort of giant like sigh of relief or joy that you have when you see these games kind of get popular, whether they're a remaster or like Metroid Fusion is going to get put on the Switch, or something like Sea of Stars that will release later this year. Like as someone who really appreciates pixel art, and knows how it's made, how special do you think that is? Like how big? You think this thing's going to stick around? This whole pixel art thing?
I think pixel art is being elevated into like a timeless art form at this point. Like it's not just for games. It's like it's a genre of art. Like I see pixel artists on Twitter and DeviantArt and all these art websites and Instagram and whatnot.
Yeah,
And they're not game developers. They're not working on a game. They're not producing assets for a game. They are just pixel artists. Like they like making art, and pixel art is their medium. So it's not just pixel art was born out of necessity
yeah,
originally. It was
yeah,
limited memory. How can we convey as much, you know, graphical information as possible with as little memory as possible? And, pixel art was the solution to that. But now that there are no limitations, pixel art, yeah, it was born out of a technical limitation, but it has taken on a life of its own. And I think even non-gamers can look at pixel art aesthetic, especially modern pixel art aesthetic, and just instantaneously appreciate the the craftsmanship of it. Like it sort of looks like it sort of is reminiscent of like old mosaic tile paintings on
yeah,
like in
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
cathedrals and stuff. Like it's the same mindset of like being able to create, color and form, and a lot of the very very traditional building blocks of any composition or artistic composition just being done with small squares. And you realize that through the limitation of either your palette size or how many colors you're using, how much you can really do with so little. And even though everything is available to you and you can do digital painting or 3D renderings or photo manipulations, all that stuff's available, and you can put all that stuff in games if you wanted to, putting on those restraints kind of makes you appreciate the art in a different way than if it was just like, a hand-drawn painting or a
Yeah, yeah,
3D
yeah, yeah.
model.
No, I totally get exactly where you're coming from. And I really feel like we started to see, kind of how robust pixel art could be with like stuff like Shovel Knight in 2014, which is almost 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think. And how, the indie space is really where retro gaming and retro style went to kind of live for a long time before it was like re-embraced by
Yep.
the bigger companies. Now, obviously it seems like I agree with you. It seems that like pixel art is here to stay in video games for sure, and otherwise, and in other places. But like, it keeps getting better. Like, it's kind of wild. of how good it could get and how much better it can get. Even like within Shovel Knight, even the 10 years since, or the 9 years since Shovel Knight released, like the stuff we've seen people do with pixel art in games has been incredible. A game that you and I have talked about ad nauseum lately has been Sea of Stars, which is a brand new RPG coming out from Sabotage Studio, who a few years back has had released The Messenger, which was another 2D kind of Metroidvania 8 and 16-bit inspired game. So when looking at like that type of pixel art, like how do you react to like something like Sea of Stars based on like what you've seen in the past and what might be coming in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like it's taking it to another level. I mean, there were some pretty amazing pixel art games, especially in the 32-bit era,
Yeah.
that a lot of Americans were deprived of because America was all about 3D graphics, whether it be on the Sega Saturn or the PlayStation One. And but those systems did have a lot of games that kind of had that the 32-bit style pixel art, which just meant more colors, more frames of animation, able to like cycle through images faster, those kinds of things. And I would consider Sea of Stars to be kind of like a 32-bit era type look, where you're just dealing with more colors and some interesting programmatic effects that allow the artist to create kind of generated pixel art effects. Like it looks like the shadows in this game are
Yeah.
sort of generated based on where the light source is in the level. And these are things that an NES or a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis, like even even if you were cheating a little bit, you wouldn't be able to do those kinds of things, especially back in the day, and even now if you were trying to replicate that look. So, I mean, Sea of Stars is just it the instantaneous appeal is the art, right? I mean, and then you see that the game is kind of heavily inspired by Chrono Trigger. So, I mean, you're going to win over a lot of people right there
Hey,
because how
greatest
many
game ever
people
made.
adore Chrono Trigger.
Greatest
But
game of all time.
yeah, I mean, you look at the art, and I mean, it's interesting when pixel art, when you can stand across the room and look at a game, and you almost can't even tell that it's pixel art from 30 feet away,
Yeah.
and then you get close to it, and you're like, oh my god, that's pixel art. It's like you realize the fidelity of the art is so good. And I guess for anybody listening that is interested in pixel art, like having made my own sprites now and animated a few of them, it's like it is so much work to make good pixel art. Like there is no shortcut with pixel art. Like with like a lot of modern games, a lot of the incredible fidelity that you see on like 3D games is a result of 3D models and lighting and shader technology that makes the surface of
Yeah.
whatever character is moving, it makes it look photorealistic, right? So a lot of the stuff that makes it look like a lot of the wow factor of those games is generated by technology that exists, lighting technology and shaders and all this stuff, which is an art of its own way, right? And a lot of work and a lot of calibration goes into making games look the way they do using that stuff. But the refractions of light through like moving water is something that is algorithmically generated. It's an artist doesn't sit there and actually draw those refractions or decide where they are. The program sort of takes care of it for you. And granted, a lot of setup goes into that, but none of that exists with pixel art. With pixel art, you have to manually paint every pixel. And yeah, there's some tools out there to speed things up, and but a lot of it really is just traditional hand drawn animation. And
That's
although
incredible.
I do see Sea of Stars doing a couple of interesting things, and I don't know how they're doing them. That's like really incredible. Most of it still really is just all the buildings and the character sprites. Those are all hand animated, hand drawn sprites, and there's no way around it. It takes a lot of time to make that stuff.
So it's no wonder why these games take so long to make. And obviously, we've both played the demo for Sea of Stars. I was thoroughly impressed as someone who is a fan of Chrono Trigger, as someone who is a fan of Super Mario RPG, as someone who's a fan of, your classic 16 and 32-bit era RPGs in general, like this game is like checking off all the boxes for me. I cannot wait till late August when it comes out, and I feel like it will take my life for like a few weeks. How jazzed are you about this one?
Yeah, I'm really excited because the Messenger was it might be one of my favorite games of all time at this point. I just adore that game. I just think it's so good. And this game takes place in the same world as the Messenger. Obviously, a completely different genre, but between the art and the sound that I've seen in the demo, it's like I just can't wait.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. They even got the same composers. They got people from, who worked on some of these classic games as well to come in and work on it. I too was heavily impressed with the Messenger back. I think that a 2020 game, 2019. I forget off the top of my head.
I think it was a few years back,
Yeah,
2018. It's been a
2018
little
maybe.
while.
I don't know. It
Not
was
sure.
good. That's time doesn't make any sense anymore, and doesn't mean anything.
It's true.
But it's special though. It's special that we have developers now who are like, our age, even maybe even a little younger, who grew up playing these games, these classic games, and instead of trying to go out of their way to make something new, they're going out of their way to make something that is in some way, shape, or form an homage to what they grew up playing, but like better. And I don't mean better in terms of quality. I mean like the games can do more because they have more tools to work with. And while restrictions often, can create some incredible art, it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, we are still putting restrictions on ourselves where like we got to do this with pixel art, but like the jump in how good something like Sea of Stars looks compared to, a lot of other stuff that came out in the last handful of years. And it's really something special. The folks over at Sabotage, the folks over at Yacht Club Games, I feel like they're like at the forefront of just doing incredible stuff with pixels, and I'm so incredibly impressed with it. Whether it was, whatever they're doing with Shovel Knight, I don't know what the heck he's doing next, but whatever they're doing with him over at Yacht Club. What is that game, Mina the Hallower, where he plays the
Yeah,
rat? That one's it's like a Link's Awakening like, which is it's purposely made to look like a Game
yeah.
Boy Color game.
I'm excited for that game too.
Dude, at this point, yeah, me too, me too. Dude, at this point, Crunchyroll is like making Game Boy games. Like they're making Game Boy Color games that you can play in a Game Boy Color with the cartridge, or if you have an analog pocket like I do, you could actually download the ROM. It's
Yeah.
wild. It's wild,
Yeah, I
dude.
mean, there's different expectations with indie games than with AAA games, right? People demand a certain amount of hours to get out of a $60 game versus a cheaper indie game. And although pixel art development and sprite animations is a very time consuming process, the overall expanse of an indie game does not need to be on the same level as something like GTA 5, right? Where you have thousands of people working on this absolutely massive landscape with just a disgusting amount of assets.
Yeah, I know, it's
um,
insane.
so and I think that's why a lot of the indie game studios uh, lean into the retro stuff, because the people that are making the games were into those games as a kid and want to keep that alive, and B is that like I said, even though a tremendous amount of work goes into these games and there's still multi-year development cycles for pixel art indie games, it still does require the work of less people.
Yeah,
Not to say those people aren't working like an insane amount of hours and putting a ridiculous amount of effort and time and money into these projects.
yeah,
But it's still, you do have studios that are either one person or a handful of people. You have studios that that are international teams that don't even meet in the same office. You have
yeah.
an artist, from Europe and a programmer from wherever, and they all work together. I think that's how Ori and the Blind Forest came together. I believe that team was kind of spread all over the globe, and they just worked on it together and made it happen.
And both of those games are terrific. You know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
those are some love me some Ori. Really, really
yeah,
good stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, I
beautiful
think
games.
I think Sea of Stars is a that's a day one pickup. I think I'm going to pick that up. the day it comes
Yeah,
out.
yeah, and I've kind of the turn-based RPGs, even though I loved them as a kid, they've kind of fallen out of favor for me just because of
What?
time. Just the amount of time you got to put into some of them. I played through Octopath Traveler 1, and I really liked it, but it was it was just a lot of grinding. It was a lot of battles, and it was a lot of leveling up, and a lot of characters to like maintain, and that it just takes time. It takes a lot of time to get through some of those games. And Octopath Traveler is kind of short by comparison to some other RPGs that are out there. But you know the turn-based stuff, it's been less appealing to me. But with that said, Sea of Stars looks so good, and I love the development studio behind it, that that's going to be a day one get for me as well.
No, I'm with you here, man. I'm with you. It looks awesome. I'm so excited for it. What a great celebration of some fantastic retro games there. And as someone who doesn't mute their TV while playing video games, the fact that you have to hear the music in order to get the rhythm down is always really special. In when you're in some sort of timed hit based combat situation. I think Sea of Stars looks like a massively cool game, and I cannot wait to play it. So before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you one fun question before we go and before you tell us everything you're doing out there in the world of retro gaming. If you could have one retro remake, what would it be?
Well, define remake. So like just a game that was on an old console that just gets ported to a new console.
You get ported, remade, a remaster, whatever you want.
I'm going to give you one of the most random and probably one of the most random, not thought out answers possible. And if I thought about
that's what we do on this show.
If I thought about this for like maybe 5 minutes, I would change my answer. And this is objectively probably a terrible response, but I really want them to put Spin Dizzy on the Switch internet service, because I feel like it's just such a random game that the Switch internet service has a lot of weird games on it, especially the Super Nintendo library. Like, it started off and it's like, okay, we got Mario World, we got Kirby Superstar, we got Mario Kart. Okay, and then they started adding like just some like bizarre random games.
It's a lot of Jalico.
Yeah, it's like all these Jalico games. I'm like, you know what? Put Spin Dizzy Worlds on there, only because I want more people to hear the soundtrack.
I mean, that's a good enough reason to want something. Just put the soundtrack on there. That's such a wild answer, and I'm all for it.
No, Spin Dizzy is an isometric labyrinth game where you literally play as a top. And it's like it's an isometric puzzle platforming game. Some people really don't like it. I think it's great. But it's such a random game that I feel like I would just turn on my Switch one day and it's like, oh, there's something new to play on the SNES, and I just hit the little button and it's like, oh, Spin Dizzy.
This is why I don't let you think it out, because that's a fantastic answer. I'm so happy that you like Spin Dizzy. Brendan, man, thanks for spending time with us today. Where can people find you out there? What are you working on?
I am developing my own video game. It's called Nixie. You can go to nixiegame.com, and all my social media links are on there. Follow me on Twitter, join the Discord so you can see all the updates on the game. But I mean, that's sort of the main thing that I'm pushing now. I'm doing some other nerdy stuff, but that's like the nerdiest thing I'm doing.
Oh man, I love it. Dude, everyone has to check out Nixie. If you haven't checked out Nixie yet, please just do it. Brendan's putting together an incredible game. Find him on Twitter. He's always posting development updates on the website, but also on the internet. And he's got great videos and all sorts of stuff just showing us everything that hopefully. So Nixie's coming out in 2023, right? No, okay.
Yeah, exactly. 2033.
2033, folks. Put it on your calendars now. What's good is that pixel art is timeless.
I was going to say, hopefully pixel art is actually timeless and doesn't go out of fashion by then.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much, man. And I wish you all the best. I always love seeing the Nixie updates. For those of you who want to find us on the internet, you can find us at Long Island Retro Gaming, or you can find us at LI Retro. If you want, please come say hi to Brendan and I during the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, which is running from August 11th through the 13th, 2023 at the Cradle of Aviation Museum here on Long Island, New York. That is right, on Long Island, not in Long Island, on Long Island, New York. Brendan and I will be in the dorkiest of the sections, the museum section, that has all the oddities and the weird stuff and the Pokemon Center. And be sure to come and say hi to us and give us a high five and talk to us about how much you hate how horrible we are at random video games on Sega Genesis. Right?
Yep.
Yep.
You can do that.
Have a conversation. Have a conversation with us about that. But also, please be sure to check out our video series, which is called Ever Dives. You can find that on the Long Island Retro Gaming channel. And you can come back here next month. We'll have another guest talking about more retro-inspired stuff. And in the meantime, be sure to go out there or stay home and play as many retro games and as many video games as you possibly can. So once again, for Brendan Bailey, I'm Mike Staub. Thank you for listening to this month's episode of the Long Island Retro